this will be our final session and roundtable discussion. And in mathematics, there is a well-known Hilbert question which shaped the future of mathematics for the next 100 years. So we thought similar Hilbert questions for the science of moral psychology, and both Valerio and Diane will give their answer to such questions, and at the end they will provide their own questions. So Diane, you can lead, and I am here.
Should we just take them one by one and?
Yeah, I can read the questions first of all, if you want, and you can answer it, or
okay.
you can discuss whatever you prefer.
I don't know. Maybe you can read them so that everybody.
Actually, they're written up here.
Yeah.
Maybe what you could do is read to us the proposed answer, and then we can say what we would like to add or subtract from your answer.
Okay. The first question is about, is morality a universal evolutionary adaptation or a cultural contingent construct shaped by historical and religious influences, and what implications does this have for global ethical framework? So this is actually a very difficult question to answer, and seemingly there are both universal traits and cultural practices which interact with each other, and the modern evolutionary cultural frameworks also try to explain this complicated relationship. For example, as Hassan explained, there are some universal dispositions which make people prone to develop some belief systems, including religious or moral beliefs, but there are also some cultural forces which shape these natural dispositions, and religious beliefs are also one of them. So that's why this can be an overview of a potential answer, of course, we can hear.
Okay.
Your voices.
Who goes first?
After you.
Okay. Okay. So first of all, let me tell that this idea of the Hilbert's question is brilliant. I like it, especially I'm a mathematician as a background, so I already knew about the Hilbert's question. So you touched something. And let me also add that you might know that some of the Hilbert's questions have a price of $1 million for. So I don't know the template on grant how rich it is, but you can put a price of $1 million for each of these questions. Maybe it will work as. Anyways, okay. So regarding this question. Yeah, I think it holds a variant of my comment I gave to the talk before, that in my opinion it's difficult to imagine that morality evolved specifically to fulfill a certain higher level things like increasing cooperation. I'm more strong. I'm inclined to think that there were some precursors of morality and precursors of religions that are probably more fundamental, and probably comes from the uniquely human awareness of mortality, and these are evolutionary. This is the first thing that evolved, and then somehow we discovered that these things can be useful to promote social cooperation, and we started using these precursors to develop more complex cultural phenomena, like religions, like moral principles, but I think this is more a byproduct than in some innate disposition. Maybe to connect with my talk, there might be some innate dispositions related to harm, and I think that may become concrete in different ways. Like, for example, the purity dimension could be seen as a way to avoid being harmed. So there might be some mechanisms of this type. So I think I kind of agree with the point of the basic idea of moral foundations theory, that there might be some innate modules that are the basis of morality, but these innate modules come from very basic forces, like the instinct for self-preservation, or the awareness of mortality, these very, very basic things.
Well, I agree that with your proposed solution, it's both. That is, I think the adaptive significance of all of the basic moral rules that we talk about in the literature is clear, and I think that the point that Hassan made earlier in the afternoon, that what determines an adaptation is whether or not it improves survival and reproduction, and basically in the end reproduction, because obviously you have to survive in order to reproduce up to a certain point. So yes, survival is important, but survival until you have viable offspring actually is the key. And so the moral rules that we have all make it easier for people to live in groups. Anyway, we seem to be, not just from a species point of view, but a genus point of view, group living creatures. So if you're going to be in a group, being able to suppress, eliminate, that's impossible, but to suppress internal strife, too much competition, is key. And most morality as cooperation, or the moral foundations that Haidt talks about, various other formulations, all point to there being several different criteria or means to reduce conflict. So being helpful to one another, being generous to one another, obeying authority. I can't even recover these things, up to 7 of them, if not more, shows that probably each of them was selected over time for different reasons, for different relationships. Something I was talking about at lunch is that how you deal with different kinds of conflicts sometimes requires different kinds of morality. And so these things are, morality is not a single thing. It's a whole bunch of adaptations, I would say. But cultural influences now shape those basics and tell you when, under what circumstances, and what degree to practice these things, and in what form. So, of course, it's both adaptation and cultural construct.
Is there any contribution to this question? Okay, the second one is very related with the first one. Is moral consistency an evolved psychological trait, or is it primarily reinforced through cultural and religious norms and how does this impact individual and societal well-being. So maybe we can also apply this interactionist paradigm of
Hocam, can you use microphone because it covers your voice from camera? That's
is it
can also
working?
use that.
Okay. Now, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, this second question is also very relevant for the first one, because the same interactionist paradigm of evolutionary psychology can also be applied here, because we have some evolved characteristics which makes us more stable, for example, more predictable. For example, those groups who are stably reciprocate with each other may be more likely to survive, and also the cultural norms which focus on reciprocation would be also as a meme survived more likely. So maybe this can be a simple answer, and we can hear your voices as well for the second one.
Okay, so my feeling is that there is some room for changing moral norms. So when you go to a different society and you live in a different society, after a while you internalize the norms of that society. So I guess this points to a direction in which moral consistency is not entirely an evolved psychological trait, because it is it can be affected. So we can change moral principles, moral norms during our life. How does this impact individual and social well-being? I guess, but this connects also to one of the questions afterwards. So maybe I don't want to tell too much about this, but I think I'll just say one sentence on this. I think it can make salient the fact that there is a moral norms pluralism, which is something that many people have not yet internalized or understood. So I think in one of the presentations this morning there was the observation that believers are less likely to believe that there are moral subjectivism. And of course, if you are a moral absolutist, you're more likely to enter in conflict with others, I guess. So being aware that there are other moral principles and that along one's life one can change from one moral principles to another, I think it can help finding common grounds between different moral views and decrease conflict, cultural moral conflicts.
To directly answer the question, I don't think that moral consistency is a trait at all. I think it may be a product of other traits, like tending to be obedient to rules and norms in general, part of this about cultural and religious norms, I think, is on the point. Yes, those kinds of things can help people be consistent by, you keep referring to the Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments is just a model of a list of, the required rules for a particular religion, but they involve, several of them involve things that we regard as moral norms. They don't all, by the way. All 10 commandments don't have to do with morality, which is interesting. But clearly, somebody who believes in the religion and believes in religious authority is likely to follow all the rules rather than just some of them. So I don't think that's a psychological trait all by itself, but the tendency to follow rules may be How does this impact individual and social well-being? Well, I think it's a little bit of a paradox, because we obviously socially benefit from rule following people who perform their moral duties. But we also benefit socially from iconoclasts and people who deviate from time to time and innovate. And so probably not turning everybody into robots is a good idea. And so, in other words, there are benefits to both sides.
Any contribution?
Like maybe in addition to what Diane just said, it's not like by the way, but name like most of the people being relatively morally consistent and benefit an individual when I run across that person again, because when I do run across that person again, I'm able to recognize him or her, and if she is relatively consistent, I can estimate how she's going to act in a certain situation. So that might be maybe useful.
Yeah, it can be related with the moral integrity, and it may impair moral hypocrisy, so which can in turn actually improve personal relationships, and maybe it can be related with the institution's moral consistency. So without understanding what drives moral consistency, individual moral consistency, maybe it would be difficult to what Daron Acemoglu and James Robinson imagine in terms of morally consistent institutions, secular institutions, because a morally consistent institution should behave fairly across both groups in the society, but it's not always the case. That's why maybe we can think of it as a simulation of a more societally important phenomenon.
Except that fairness is only one aspect of morality.
Can you also use that? Because it's that.
This is yours. You want to do the third one?
Yeah. Actually, yes, you are right, of course. It depends on the social norms. If the social norms are destructive, maybe rule following is not a good thing. And moral consistency is also not a good thing. So maybe it depends on, yeah.
But I agree with you, but for not all moral conditions, for example, for a moral particulars, their moral consistency, for them, the moral consistency is not to give the same answer every time, but to assess the situation, and that includes internal variables as well. So maybe we should differ from our understanding of moral consistency. Maybe we shouldn't look at the outcome of their results, but the motivation, and then interpret it as a trait. Maybe we can then interpret it as a trait.
Okay.
Okay, maybe I'm. What do you have to do? Does this work?
No.
No. Okay. Now? Okay. I'm kind of a peculiar psychologist. I'm not sure that I believe in the reality of traits. But there probably are some trait-like kinds of things.
Okay. Other question is there an evolutionary basis for the dual process model in moral cognition with intuitive and reflective processes evolving to handle specific social challenges, and how does this influence contemporary moral behavior? So we know that there are some evolved characteristics of both intuition and reflection, and sometimes people apply intuitive loyalty and sometimes intuitive fairness like moral endorsements, and maybe for evolutionary familiar issues, intuitions can be more adaptive, and for evolutionary novel issues, especially in secular contexts, reflection can be used to negotiate, for example, for conflict resolution as well. So this can be an outline.
Okay, so My feeling here is that there is indeed an evolutionary basis for the dual process model in moral cognition that is based on the fact that we have limited resources. So we are limited, and in particular our brain is limited, and our capacity to compute the pros and cons associated. You cannot. Okay, so I was saying that I think there is an evolutionary basis for a dual process model that comes from the fact that we are limited beings and we have limited capacity to calculate the pros and cons corresponding to the available actions. So in many real life situations, we simply don't have the capacity to compute all the consequences. And so in this case, it's good to have some shortcuts, some heuristics that can help us make good decisions. So moral intuitions could be evolved in this way, while in other contexts, like for example in negotiation or political contexts where people have time or should have time to think thoroughly through the possible alternatives, then one have the possibility to explore all the potential consequences and make more deliberate decisions. Just to summarize, I think there is an evolutionary basis that comes from the fact that many decisions that we make them in a short time, and in that case, heuristics are useful for making good decisions.
I would agree that there is an evolutionary basis for intuitive versus reflective thinking. It seems clear, it's been documented that it exists, but we listen to a great deal of evidence today that it doesn't make much difference when people are confronted with simple binary decisions that are related to these moral questions, which also seem to be adaptations in themselves. I think where slow thinking is going to be of help to us in social and actually in moral decisions is when things are complex. And so we don't need to ponder very long about what offer to make in a dictionary game or something of that sort. Probably our intuition will tell us the right answer, at least the most common answer, rather quickly. But the slow thinking, well, if you're thinking about a question like somebody was mentioning abortion in the context of the donation kind of thing, it's a complicated question, and hardly anybody, unless they've been taught an answer and have, given the authority over to somebody else, hardly anybody has an immediate answer to that kind of complicated question. Or how can we deal with pollution in the environment? Are we going to stop taking airplanes? Are we going to, what are we going to eat? How are we going to move ourselves around? These things are very complicated, and you have to think about them at length.
Any contributions? Okay, our next question is: does reflective moral reasoning consistently yield more desirable ethical outcomes than intuition, or are there contexts in which intuitive responses better serve individual and societal welfare? This is actually one of the theoretical questions what Kahneman and Gigerenzer continuously discussed, and of course there are some contexts where intuition is applicable and advantageous, and whereas reflection are advantages, as you also described. But a recent discussion in dual process model also explained the goal of and the function of reflection. in default interventionist models of dual process model by Evans and Stanovich, actually goal of reflection are sometimes supposed to be intervene and inhibit intuitive responses, but there is also motivated reasoning, a function of reflection, which allows the reasoner to justify their initial position. So little is known regarding the empirical and the boundary conditions of these effects. So probably reflection does not lead to desirable ethical outcomes in all the time and all the context. So yes.
Yeah, also I would like to add the fact that reflection is typically costly. So whether it's the individual that has to reflect or an institution, that has a cost. So I guess I was trying to think about one explicit example, but didn't come to my mind in 30 seconds. But so I will keep the argument abstract. But we can imagine a situation in which an intuition gives an output that for the individual or the social point of view from 0 to 10 is 9, so it's a good outcome, but maybe not the perfect outcome. You could deliberate for 6 months or 3 years and to reach 9.5 or 10, but you have paid a huge cost during this period to reach a slightly better improvement. And I guess in many real-life situations there is this trade-off between what you actually gain by deliberating, but versus the cost of deliberating. And I haven't seen much studies on this specific aspect. Maybe it is something that one could look at in the future.
Yes, my response is going to be closely related to the stuff I've just said, but I would, if I could take the liberty, I would say that the real question is something different here, not whether deliberation is going to help us get better outcomes, but is there such a thing as superior ethical outcomes? In other words, is there one principle that overrides the others? There are some examples in the literature. I don't know if anybody even remembers Kohlberg anymore, but he argued that post-conventional reasoning was superior to other kinds of moral reasoning. Kurt Gray tells us that the only thing that we really have to think about is harm and prevention of harm, that the other matters are not really essentially moral unless they can be translated into harm. Another example escapes my mind right this second, but for example, Joshua Green tells us that universal beneficence, that is, utilitarianism in its philosophical form, is really what underlies everything. Now, it's not clear to me that all of these principles come to the same thing. So I'm not sure that we know what is the most desirable outcome, and that's where our motivated reasoning can really come into it. So how are we going to ask this Hilbert question, I think is the question here.
Yeah, it's very difficult to make normative discussions, of course, based on scientific evidence, and I agree with both points as well. Is there any contributions?
There are a lot of cases. Okay, thank you. There are a lot of cases where intuition can help us make fast moral decisions. For example, firefighters have to save people or have to save between two people, so they have to make quick decisions. And our intuitions are, constructed based on our phylogenetical and ontological processes. What do we mean by phylogenetics? Meaning our shared experiences as Homo sapiens. What we are talking about ontology, intuitions based on our own development as a human being. So sometimes we have to make fast decisions. Sometimes we have to stereotype people because we may have limited time, or we may have limited cognitive capacities. We cannot think deliberately about everything in life. So we have to make decisions, and sometimes stereotyping our attitudes we have, they may not be totally consistent and totally accurate, but they are mostly accurate. They can be mostly accurate in some situations because they are constructed based on shared experiences. But of course, every situation has too many variables, and every person has too many variables to make one common judgment. But intuition is something that makes our lives easier.
Can I add another example that came to my mind after hearing these contributions? And actually, I was mentioning before during my talk about the equity efficiency trade-off, and it came out to my mind that I actually have a paper on the equity efficiency trade-off showing that under intuition, so under time pressure, people tend to be more equitable, so they go towards the equitable distribution, and under time delay, they tend to be more efficient. So an equal distribution, but that gives more money to everybody. So now let's try to imagine an iterated, so a society, let's iterate this for years so that you create deliberation. By deliberating, you create a more and more efficient society, but more and more unequal society. While under intuition, we would create a society where maybe it's less efficient, but people are more equal. So which society do you prefer?
The one where people are happier.
Yeah.
Our next question is, to what extent did religious beliefs evolve as mechanism to reinforce cooperation and deter free riding within groups, and what lessons does this offer for modern secular societies, which is also very relevant for the last one, because throughout today we saw that religion foster cooperation, but also it promotes conflict. Because religious cooperation is actually parochial cooperation. It includes their in-groups. When we look at the recent evidence, Hassan reviewed that literature. But sometimes it can also lead to conflict. That's why when we look at the secular institutions, maybe one Hilbert question, what is the possibility of having an equal and normatively equal society, secular society? Can we just apply what we learn from religious authorities? So punishment is good, punishment deters free riding, so dictatorship can also be possible by applying this logic. So what can be the possible solutions of not having any dictatorship, so not applying the evolutionary pressures we learned from the evolution of religion into the secular societies, like inclusive institutions?
Can I jump my turn here? I'll turn it back over to you. Justice is one of the issues in morality, but justice in and of itself is not by any means the whole of morality. And so if secular society is able to create a moral order, it's going to be based around justice. Now, we know that the foundations that most people agree on are fairness, and that is a version of justice, and care. But secular institutions have trouble coming up with care. They can implement it, but it's usually motivated by, let's call it, moral concerns that get turned into laws and institutions. On the other hand, justice itself is not one thing either. It consists of and saying fairness doesn't help. But equal distributions and proportional distributions are both necessary ingredients in justice. And need is also an important ingredient, which hardly ever gets into the equation when people are talking about justice. So you're asking a set of interrelated questions rather than a single one here, I think.
Yeah, maybe one addition to this original question, is it possible to find a common ground between different parties without focusing on universalizing or care and fairness when we think about the whole scale of morality?
I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. Okay, so I think, as I already said before, I don't think that religious beliefs evolved as a mechanism to reinforce cooperation. They are a very useful means to reinforce cooperation, but cooperation can evolve for many different reasons, and I guess there might be also different mechanisms, especially maybe even in an industrial or in a technological society where there's an actual way to see what people do. And of course this is a dangerous ground because we enter into surveillance, so technology used as surveillance. But maybe let's keep this aside, which is a bit slippery. But what I wanted to say is that I think that secular societies can find a way to create cooperation, to reinforce cooperation within the society without necessarily using religious beliefs. And that's basically all I want to say about this question.
So
Can I add a sentence there, which is, I think that nations and other political entities create what we might call pseudo-religions, which are reinforced using some of the same ritualistic methods that religions use to help pump up a sense of social unity. And so I'm not sure that's a great direction either, because it takes its extreme form in fascism.
Yeah, but
I don't know the answer to your question.
I'll add something along these lines. I completely agree with this. In a fundamentally different way, I think that the market can work as a way to make people cooperate because they have a common objective. And they have a common interest not to destroy the other person, because the other person could, well, and so I think that this is just to say that there are ways to create cooperation in secular societies. Of course, maybe none of them is perfect, and we can discuss whether one is better than the other ones, than the others. But definitely, I don't think that religious beliefs are necessary to create cooperation within groups.
Any contribution?
Okay. I think the common goal of religions and secular system is that creating a society where people perceive and believe that there's a justice and there's a reason why people should cooperate. So when people do their work and they cooperate, they expect justice either supernaturally or from the secular love system. For example, if someone does me something wrong, then if I am religious, I am expecting for that person to be punished. Or if I do something good, I expect that to be rewarded in the other world. For a successful secular system, for instance, we can think about Sweden, Norway, and countries like that. In those kinds of countries, people believe that there is a just system. If someone, for example, sexually assaults a woman, people generally expect that person to be prosecuted correctly. So when this doesn't happen, for example, in Turkey, there is a common belief among many people that women are being harassed and the government does not regularly or do enough for that. So when these kinds of thinking or these kinds of events happen, people go one or two ways. First, they can think that that person might have done something to deserve it. So they blame the victim and say that, okay, this has to be their fault, because if this is not their fault, then the system is broken and we are not taken care of by our government and by our people. So system justification occurs there. The other option is that people do not believe in the legitimacy of the system, and civil wars happen all around the world. So I think people answer in one of those two ways. In conclusion, for a secular society to be successful and for cooperation to continue, people have to believe that, people have to perceive that the system is working correctly. So we need to build a independent and strong justice system. So I think that's the
So inclusive institutions can be a
Yes.
solution for that. Okay, we should move faster. Can moral intuitions be deliberately trained or reshaped, and how do religious and secular teaching enhance or restrict this plasticity? So yes, it can be trained probably, but how it should be trained is a matter of discussion, because when people are exposed to different moral intuitions, their moral subjectivism tend to increase, which in turn lead them to be more tolerant and less prejudiced against outgroups. And in contrast, moral objectivism is related with the close-mindedness. So maybe we can think of this question in terms of what kind of moral intuitions or in what directions it should be trained. It is also a normative question as well. So.
Yeah, okay, so no, we have to go faster, so I will be fast. So yes, as you said, they can be trained and reshaped. How to do that? Yes, it's this touches the point and the problem of whether there is a normative and objective way to push to define morality. And yeah, I'm a pluralist, so I don't think there is an objectively better way. This doesn't mean that every way is equivalent, and they are not all the same, but it's difficult to define one which is better.
Maybe we can think of the next question together, because it is also asking how can moral psychology guide societies in reconciling conflicts between secular and religious moral system to foster social cohesion, because it is also related with the moral training and intervention, so maybe we can think of it together.
Okay, I'm a little worried about the implication that this training and internalization, I heard that word several times today, carry a sort of blank slate assumption about the human mind, whereas I'm inclined to think that there are developmental processes that, yes, you can shape or you can stunt or you can do various things, but if you want to have a normatively desirable outcome, you need to take into account the developmental processes in the growing child, or maybe I should even extend that into early adulthood, and design whatever interventions or training programs or education that you think is going to produce a good effect, needs to work with that developmental process rather than assuming that it doesn't exist.
Any contributions? Okay, I'm moving on to the AI question. What frameworks can model psychology provide to navigate ethical challenges posed by artificial intelligence and autonomous systems, and how should these systems be integrated with human moral values? There are different perspectives in dealing with this question, such as value alignment. For example, if we understand people's motivations and people's values in different contexts, so maybe we can reflect on the artificial intelligence and other autonomous frameworks. So what do you think? And Valerio is an expert, I think, in this issue.
Well, expert, I've just started working on this. Okay. I think, so to connect also with the question before, I think the most important lesson we can learn from moral psychology is the fact that there are several moral dimensions. So we don't know exactly how many, 5, 6, 7, or maybe 8 or 9 or 23, but there are clearly, so morality is multidimensional. This means automatically that it's virtually impossible to define normatively a set of moral principles, or one moral principle that is above the others. And coming to artificial intelligence, I think this can help. So first of all, it tells us that we should not see artificial intelligence as a monolithic entity like artificial intelligence and make the same decisions for everybody. But I think what's going to happen is that everybody is going to have an assistant, an artificial intelligence-based assistant that will be weighted. So it will learn the moral dimensions of the single person and make suggestions, give advices that are weighted on the person. So from the point of view of the single individual using artificial intelligence to make better decisions, I think the solution will come out automatically and easily. The problem I think is going to be with artificial intelligence used to make socially relevant decisions, like a policymaker that is using advice from artificial intelligence for making policy relevant decisions. And given the fact that indeed there might be different moral principles in the society, it's difficult here to give a solution. There is an attempt to try. I'm trying to remember the name. There's a paper in Trends in Cognitive Science by Jim Everett and someone else, where they say that one should collect observations from the society to try to understand that, to train the artificial intelligence system in such a way that reflects the distribution of the values within the society. And I think this could be a way to go. And I think this.
Other than saying that probably a lot of such systems need to incorporate general principles like do no harm, which I think are quite difficult to program into a system. Otherwise, we would have autonomous automobiles already that could be on the road. They don't know how to tell whether harm is being done or not. And certainly, artificial intelligence is going to be deployed in military situations, and you can't teach it to do no harm, because its whole purpose will be to do harm. I don't know. I don't know whether this is a generally answerable question.
Yeah, sure. There are different perspectives, so whatever we choose, there will be others. They can do whatever they want, so this is a dangerous framework, actually. Okay, sure.
I'm not sure whether we should or we could apply artificial intelligence into morality, because for trolley problems, someone who is utilitarian can choose to push one person, and as they consider this situation as virtuous. But we also know that psychopathy is also related with pushing one person into that place. So while we have got that kind of relative choices, I am not sure whether we should apply human morality into artificial intelligence. Maybe artificial intelligence should have its own morality and based on its experience as someone, human can't have it, obviously.
So this links Diane Hoca interpretation. What is the superior moral judgments?
Yes, exactly.
Maybe we should just teach artificial intelligence not to make any decisions.
Let me add, I completely see your point, but the way artificial intelligence works is by training the system using some material, and moral decisions or suggestions, the moral judgments of the artificial intelligence will be a reflection of the material that we give it. So at the end, there is always the human decision to give this set of material rather than another set of materials. So at least at the beginning, it's not clear whether artificial intelligence can really evolve their own moral judgments. It's possible that after making decisions, it will change moral judgments, but the feedback that is needed, the reinforcement that give reinforcement to some judgments and not others, will still be with humans. So there is always the reflection of humans within the artificial intelligence system, unless, and this I think might be interesting, to simulate a society of artificial intelligence systems. So imagine that you write a computer code where you let two copies of ChatGPT interact, and maybe they evolve, oh, this could be a cool experiment. Maybe they evolve a universal moral theory, and we discover a new theory of morality by letting ChatGPT talk with each other for, I don't know, 1 month. Who knows what happens?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Next question, how can moral psychology inform global efforts to address urgent challenges such as climate change, inequality, and political polarization? Of course, there are huge literature regarding it, maybe framings. For example, climate change, when they are framed by impairing of God-given nature of the earth, conservatives tend to support climate change as well. So maybe we should respect others' endorsement of morality by communicating. So the question is, what kinds of intervention techniques should we more focus on to solve these issues? Or what kind of moral psychological research paradigms should we more focus on in dealing with these questions?
That's a marketing strategy problem.
But what kind of framings we should be more, they can be more useful for us as moral psychologists? Because there is a dearth of empirical investigation. So we don't have any guidance. We don't have any overarching theoretical framework which can guide us in trying to manage this issue. So the question is actually this: what kind of frameworks we should be?
Since we don't even know what desirable outcomes are, for sure.
Yeah, at least maybe selfish versus unselfish behavior can be seen as a neutral language. So against selfishness, maybe we can try to endorse, we can try to foster in the society.
Universal beneficence, perhaps.
Okay, I'll add something. I agree, but it is connected to what you said at the beginning of this question, is that for some of these issues, actually both, let's talk with the American language, both Democrats and Republicans may agree with that something should be done, but they disagree on sometimes on how the frame or how the issue is framed. So having in mind moral foundations theory, for example, I think moral foundations theory for these things that are potentially politically divisive is more powerful because it's been introduced to explain political differences, and knowing that liberals and the Democrats and Republicans have different moral foundations could help framing the issue in a way that is more appealing to both. Of course, then one has to target the intervention, and this is not always simple, but especially moral foundations theory, I think it's helpful here.
Okay. So, because of the time constraint, I will ask at the end for contributors. So, the last question may be the focal question, because only the answer of that last question will guide us in answering the previous ones. Is it possible to build an overarching theory in moral psychology which covers both cross-cultural and cross-species and developmental aspects of morality, which can include all of those issues? A theory problem in moral psychology and in psychology. What do you think? What are your opinions?
Yeah, why not? To be honest, why not? I don't see a limitation, a physical limitation, like a law of physics that would not allow us to answer this. So why not? I think that Oliver Carey's approach to morality as cooperation, I think have some limitations on the specific dimensions, but it's an attempt to build a theory that can explain cross-cultural, I don't know about cross-species, but cross-cultural differences in moral judgment and moral development. So the theory says that moral principles are just the rules that allow to cooperate within a society, and the difference in rules comes from differences in problems, specific problems that a society happens to experience, and that's, I think it's reasonable. So this could be the starting point of an overarching theory. So different societies experience different problems and they develop different rules for cooperation.
I'm not sure that I can actually answer the question as it's written, but if there's to be an overarching theory, I think it has to be explicitly evolutionary, including an understanding of social evolution. In other words, not just genetic evolution, but how societies, ideas, communities evolve. And there's very good evidence that, in fact, many of the same processes, that is, of proliferation of types and selection over time and accumulation over time. So an explicit evolutionary framework, it seems to me, is essential in this. It's hard for me to see that we'll be able to, even if there is an overarching theory, in other words, that describes and explains the processes of production of human and perhaps subhuman morals, we will not get an answer to the most desirable outcomes. And so therefore we're always going to be in a position of making decisions about social issues and personal issues in some degree of darkness. In other words, I don't think we're going to be able to shine a light on how to solve everything.
Yeah, there are some candidates maybe, such as dual inheritance model, which tries to include both biological forces and cultural evolutionary processes like evolution of institutions, beliefs, etc. Maybe this can be a good way of moving on in this. But maybe the direction of psychology should be to prioritize validity issues, because we have some theories seemingly, but they have little predictive power. Because our tests are very biased because of our low validities. Even in dual process literature, we are working under, and there is 100 years of theoretical development. There is not any methodological unity in how to measure and how to manipulate, and what are the subtypes of reflection and intuition. So we don't know even this kind of issues. So that's why, without solving all of those issues, maybe we should start at first from the class. So to define our concepts and to try to validate those concepts experimentally. Maybe this is my contributions. And the last question is, what is your own Hilbert question for the scientific study of morality for both of you?
Okay, so before we talked about the importance of pre-registration, of course, the lack of pre-registered studies has been a big problem for psychology, and we all know this, but there is maybe an even deeper problem in psychology. I don't know if you read the paper by Muthukrishna and Harris, A Problem in Theory. The problem in psychology is that there is no mathematics. We need formal models based on mathematics. And I'm wondering, can we create a mathematical model of morality? A utility function, speaking with the language of economics, it could be a utility function that describes the utility of a person as a combination of moral dimensions. I don't think we are very far from this, because it could be a utility with some linear terms that are the moral dimensions, that there might be interactions, just the product, then there might be some more complex things. So I think at some point we will get there, but there is still some room, some effort to make.
I think you're probably right, but I don't think we're very close. I have two questions that I think might qualify as Hilbert questions. One of them is how moral psychology should deal with the regulation of sexuality. You know, if we take seriously the idea that morality fosters fertility maybe at the root of the whole thing there is sexuality, and if you ask the ordinary person, not somebody who's studying moral psychology, but man on the street, what's the most important thing about, what's the most important rule? They'll probably tell you a sexual rule rather than something. No, first they say, you should be honest. And moral psychology hardly deals with honesty. And the next thing that you'll hear will have to do with monogamy, or even if you think polygamy is okay, faithfulness in marriage, and not committing adultery, and so on and so forth. These are the central issues to most people morally, and moral psychologists don't touch it most of the time. So I think we need to investigate our own prejudice against that. Maybe we know it's going to be very complicated, and so we stay away from it. Another one is what I suggested before about looking at the developmental processes. A third one would be, what is the process of moralization? Under what conditions can it occur? Particularly if we think about Haidt's foundation's divinity-related issues can become moralized, so that people believe that it's a sin to eat certain kinds of things, or that it's a sin to touch certain kinds of things, or to step in certain places, and so forth. These things are, to the outside eye, they're very arbitrary. And moralization can happen outside of religion. If you look at, for example, veganism, where people decide that they can't wear leather, in addition to not eating animals, then, et cetera, et cetera. But certainly a person can make that decision, but that it's wrong to do it, and it's wrong for other people to do it, is what I mean by moralization. So, where does that come from? Is it really morality? How are we going to deal with that?
Thank you. As you know, Oliver Curry's morality as cooperation theory is highly criticized by lacking of a sanctity purity dimension, but maybe it can also be explained by lack of self-control, because when someone is masturbating in the street, maybe he or she is signaling the failure of self-control, and which in turn make him or her a non-cooperative partner in a potential interaction, social interaction. So maybe this can be included as a group boundary problem.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, is there any comments or questions to our speakers?
Okay. All right. For the function that you have mentioned, do you think it would be a piecewise function?
No, absolutely. I think it's going to be a polynomial. So potentially could even be any continuous function that you can approximate by a polynomial up to some certain precision. So I think there might be, I don't know, are you familiar with the moral molecule? So the second paper by Oliver Curry and colleagues, where they introduced this idea of moral molecules, so that you can combine different moral dimensions. And mathematically, I think this is we can see this as the product between the two components. But you can also have two elements of one dimension and one element of the other dimension. So you have a polynomial with x1 squared times x. So when you put everything together, by a polynomial function, you can have whichever description. I don't know. You have three elements of of family, two elements of property, and so you have x to the power 3, x1 to the power 3, x2 to the power 2, and so on. So I think through a polynomial one can mathematize Curry's theory. And this is more or less what I have in mind. I think the big question here is what are exactly the basic elements, because I'm one of the criticizers of Curry, because I do think that purity is missing there. Maybe also honesty is missing, although maybe honesty is correlated to purity. By the way, this is another question. Why both moral foundations theory and morality as cooperation theory don't have honesty? It's really strange. So I think I studied honesty a little bit using economic games. I think that's another dimension of morality. But once we have a description of all the dimensions, to put them together by a polynomial mathematically is going to be easy. And the question is whether it predicts behavior well. The units of measurement, they're going to be self-report measures of how strong you feel. Yeah, it's difficult.
Sentiment?
And maybe one of the problems of having a mathematical model of moral preferences may be the context dependency of our moral judgments, because even in a subtle deviation in a tool can change replication failures, for example. So maybe the next century's focus will be the context, how to manage the context dependency of human moral judgment in measurement and maybe manipulation.
No, that's true, absolutely, but I think one can mathematize up to a certain degree the context, because often the context is described by language, and so one of my line of research, I'm using sentiment analysis, so textual analysis, to measure the extent to which a context makes you feeling sentiments, and we already have some results that show that in this way we can predict behavior in the dictator game as a simple situation, but this is to say that we can measure up to a certain degree, not perfectly, the context.
Thank you.
To add to context dependency, because the elements are so basic, as soon as you make a decision, you kind of change the function, don't you think? Like, for example, it's just, you cannot define good or bad. It's like a very old philosophical question, and that if you want to write a function about morality, then all of those pillars are so basic and they develop literally every second, so that as soon as you make a decision, you change the moral foundation of yourself and the entire moral foundation of the society you're living in. So in itself, function has to be fluid as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, there must be some dynamical element somehow to explain the evolution of morality, basically, also for the same individual over time. I'm not saying that I have this function.
That's why it's a good Hilbert question.
Yeah, yes, it's an Hilbert question. I'm just saying that it's mathematically possible to write down this function. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy.
Thank you.
I agree with Valerio said about formal models, because I just started to take behavioral finance classes, and I realized also economics they didn't have formal models. They have models like rational choice theory. They created formulas which are obviously wrong. For example, they consider total economic situation when we are giving economic decision making, but at least as they provide some baseline to depend on. Now we have other theories like prospect theory, which can predict our decision making. So while in economics or behavioral finance, we can now see that even if they used to have wrong models, now they have some good, valid formulas. So why not for morality, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for supporting my view. No,
But they have units of measurement. It's dollars.
yeah. They're all fair points. The unit of measurement is a very deep and important point. It's also.
What are you raising to the power?
But I know I've studied many economic models. I've studied prospect theories. And this is why I think that there is room to develop a mathematical model of morality. The problem is that morality is much more complicated because it's multidimensional. There is a problem of unit of measurement, which I think is a very deep and important problem. So yes, there are problems, but maybe they are not insurmountable problems.
Maybe we'd have to be more modest and say not a function of morality, but a function of this, that, or the other attitude or sentiment or whatever that we could do.
Is this more modest or is more? So this would be a function that explains everything. So that takes into account all the dimensions that can affect human behavior and integrate them.
Okay, I probably will not live to see it.
Yeah, we have lots of problems, and the issue is
You might.
which one we will prioritize the problems, because is it a replication problem, or are they validity problem, representativeness problem, intention behavior gap problem, weirdness problem, which actually leads to replication failure and maybe the theory crisis, etc. The last comments, and we will finish then.
I am a little bit skeptical about making a mathematical model, because right now we are mostly using experimental research methods, or we are using scales. But to really understand and see morality, we also have to do qualitative studies. We also have to do participation observation, because what people say in a survey is very much different from how they behave in real life. And there are different kinds of research methods we can utilize in our research to have more broader understanding of human morality. There are many research methods. There are many research analytical methods, such as we can do interviews with people, and then we cannot add new questions based on the answers they give. So we cannot even use the fully structured interviews, because what we have in our brains as categories may not translate into what ordinary people think. So we can build something based on what they answer. So then we can use maybe thematic analysis as well. So I am kind of skeptical about how we can build a mathematical model when some of the methods we should be using maybe cannot be modeled by mathematics.
I think everything can be modeled by mathematics. I don't see why these methods cannot be modeled by mathematics.
I just could not imagine the way we would go about, how we would mathematicalize participant observation, because we are kind of operating under the natural sciences. Yes, if we are doing research purely based on, for example, imagining methods, maybe we can do something near to natural science, but we need to also remember that we are doing social science, and it is sometimes very far away from.
Yeah, there are maybe
Mathematics.
methodological problems for now, which prevents us to move forward to mathematical modeling here, of course. And I also agree with Valerio. It should be possible to mathematically model, but maybe we should try to solve smaller issues before moving on the one. And maybe, as you cited a problem in theory article, abduction, inference to the best explanation approach should be a partial solution for psychology, because we should focus different findings derived from different disciplines, not only psychology or not only economics. So that's why an interdisciplinary focus should be necessary in order to understand whether morality is evolved. For example, we should look at the ethology, developmental psychology, anthropology as well. And then we should infer the best possible explanation, as medical doctors or detectives are actually doing. But we are trying to apply hypothetical deductive approach as if we have some overarching theory. So maybe this can be another point. Is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think exactly the same. From a formal perspective, trying to find a mathematical model doesn't violate any law of physics. So we are not trying to let the apple and the apple goes up instead of down. So it's just a matter of complexity. Social sciences are far, far more complex than physical sciences. That's completely true. But one could have a function with 1 billion variables. A neural network has 150 billion parameters, and basically each decision can be seen as deterministic. So we call it black box because it's so complex that we cannot trace back the decision, but it's a deterministic decision. So maybe in the future we could overcome these problems. But I agree that we should start with something easier. So yes.
I think you've done something very rare here. Very rare indeed, which is to talk about the fundamental problems. And I really appreciated it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for you as well. This would be a harsh and long workshop, so everybody is tired probably. So thank you for all of us for joining us today.
Thank you.